market street was alive with colors, sounds, and voices. Yet for the three alien widows it felt like a cruel battlefield. They walked slowly, their thin robes dragging against the dust, their eyes tired but still carrying a spark of hope. Each of them had children waiting at home, hungry and cold, and so they came here, begging not for coins but for work. Their hands clutched small bundles of tools, the last things their dead husbands had left behind, tools of labor, proof that they were willing to work, not beg. The first widow, her skin pale silver, approached a merchant selling fabrics. She lowered her head and whispered, "Please, sir, let me help fold your cloth. I can work hard. I only need a little pay for bread." The merchant sneered, his fat hands brushing her away like she was dirt. "Go away, cursed widow, I will not let your shadow ruin my business." He slammed the wooden counter down, shutting her out. The sound echoed like thunder in her chest, but she did not cry. She had already wasted too many tears. The second widow, taller, with faint blue patterns glowing across her cheeks, stepped toward a stall of grain. "Please, I can carry, I can sweep, I can even sleep here at night if needed," she begged. The stall owner spat on the ground. "Your kind brings hunger, not fortune. I'd rather see my grains rot than let you touch them," he said as other shoppers laughed. Her face burned with shame, but still she stayed standing, her pride broken long ago. The third widow, youngest of them all, clutched her trembling hands together as she tried at the bakery stall, the warm smell of bread making her stomach twist. In pain. "Sir, even if you pay nothing, let me wash your trays. I only need the scraps for my child." The baker's wife shoved her back, eyes filled with disgust. "No scraps for thieves' widows," she shouted, pulling her husband inside and locking the door. One by one, every door closed, every window shut, every chance denied. The market noise carried on as if nothing had happened. Laughter, bargaining, coins exchanging hands. Yet for the three women, the world had turned into silence. They stood at the center of the street, rejected again, feeling the eyes of strangers upon them, not with pity, but with scorn. Whispers traveled like fire. "They are cursed," said one voice. "They carry death," said another. "No one should give them work, not after what their husbands did," hissed an elder. The words cut deeper than any blade. The widows lowered their heads, too weak to defend themselves, too desperate to leave. As the sun sank lower, shadows stretched across the road. The widows gathered at the corner of the street, their hands empty, their spirits crushed. The eldest of them whispered to the others, "Our children wait for food, and again, we bring nothing." The youngest bit her lip so hard it bled, tears filling her eyes. "What do we do if even scraps are denied? How will our little ones survive tonight?" The second widow clenched her fists, her glowing patterns pulsing faintly. "We will keep trying. Tomorrow maybe someone will hear us, maybe one heart will open," she said. But even she did not believe her own words. Above them, the stars were beginning to appear, cold and distant, as if the galaxy itself turned its face away. The widows slowly walked out of the marketplace, their steps heavy, their children's faces haunting them with every breath. Behind them, the merchants returned to their jokes, the crowd forgot them, the world moved on, but the pain of rejection was carved deep into their hearts. Still, someone was watching, hidden among the crowd. A human worker, dressed in simple dusty clothes, stood silently in the shadow of a pillar, his eyes following the widows as they were pushed from one stall to another, his jaw clenched at every insult they received. He had seen cruelty before, he had seen hunger too, but something about the sight of these women reminded him of his own mother on earth, begging neighbors for help when there was none. His hands tightened into fists, but he did not step forward. Not yet. As the widows disappeared down the dark road toward their broken hut, the human stayed rooted in place, his heart heavy with questions. Why had no one helped them? Why did the galaxy turn away from its weakest? Why did their suffering feel so familiar to him? The market lights dimmed, the doors locked, the laughter faded into the night, and in the silence, three alien widows carried their sorrow home. Unaware, that one pair of human eyes had followed them, a shadow that might yet change their fate. The human worker left the marketplace later than most. His shift at the loading docks had been long and brutal. His arms ached, his back burned, and yet, his mind was not on his own pain. It was on the three widows he had seen earlier. He could still hear the insults thrown at them, still see the doors slamming shut in their faces, and it made something twist inside him. Something old, something he had carried from Earth. His name was Daniel, a man no one noticed, a man who worked with grease on his hands and dust on his boots, but tonight he could not walk away. He followed slowly, careful not to let the widows notice him. The streets grew quieter as he moved deeper into the poor quarter. Broken lamps flickered, walls were cracked, shadows stretched long and sharp. The widows walked close together, their thin robes brushing against each other as if they drew strength just from touch. They spoke in low voices, their alien tongues soft but filled with worry. Daniel could not understand their language, but he did not need words. He had grown up watching his own mother carry the same fear in her eyes when she wondered how to feed her children. One widow stopped by a water barrel. She bent down and cupped a handful for her lips. Daniel saw her hands shaking, saw the way she hesitated before letting the children drink later instead of herself. The youngest widow glanced back suddenly, her glowing eyes catching a glimpse of movement in the shadows. Daniel froze, pressed against the wall. She frowned, but turned away, too tired to think of danger, too tired to imagine anyone following them when they owned nothing worth stealing. Daniel kept moving, quieter now, his boots avoiding loose stones, his breathing steady. He asked himself what he was doing, why he was trailing three alien women he had never spoken to, why he cared at all when the whole city had already decided they were cursed. But the answer came easily, because he could not forget the way the smallest one had begged for scraps of bread. He could not forget the trembling in her voice. It was the sound of a parent's desperation, something he knew all too well. The streets narrowed, twisting like a maze, until the widows reached the far edge of the district. Their home was nothing more than a half-collapsed hut of stone and patched cloth. One by one they stepped inside, their silhouettes swallowed by the darkness. Daniel stopped a few meters away, staring at the broken structure, his chest heavy with questions. He should leave, he told himself. This was not his problem. Not his fight. Not his world, but his legs refused to turn back. Through the torn cloth that served as a doorway, Daniel heard faint sounds, small voices, children. Their words strange, but their tones universal. Excitement at first, then disappointment, then quiet sobbing. The widows tried to comfort them, their voices gentle but thin. Daniel's throat tightened. He could see it in his mind without even entering. The children's empty bowls, the mothers holding them close with nothing to give. He leaned against a broken wall, torn between stepping forward or staying hidden. His past whispered to him, memories of a freezing night on Earth when his own mother had begged a neighbor for firewood, only to be laughed at and turned away. He remembered huddling under one blanket with his siblings, waiting for warmth that never came. That night had carved something permanent inside him. The promise that if he ever saw that same pain in someone else, he would not turn away. The wind cut through the broken street, carrying the widows' voices in fragments. One of them whispered prayers to the stars, asking for mercy. Another cursed the galaxy for being blind to their suffering. The youngest only wept quietly, her sobs muffled against her child's hair. Daniel pressed a hand against his chest, his heart pounding, his choice becoming clear. Still, fear held him back. He was human, and though his kind was tolerated on this alien world, he was still an outsider. Helping them could make him a target too. People already looked at him with suspicion, a worker who did not belong. If he stepped inside, if he offered help, he would be carrying their curse with him. The question burned in his mind. Was he strong enough to do it? From inside the hut came a cough, weak and sharp, followed by a child's pitiful wail. Daniel's hands clenched into fists, his doubt shattered in that sound. It was not about being strong. It was about being human. He took a step forward, then another, the crunch of gravel loud under his boots. The widows must have heard because their voices fell silent. The hut grew still. Daniel stopped at the entrance, staring at the torn cloth that hung like a curtain. His shadow stretched across the doorway, cast by the dim light of the street lamp behind him. The silence felt endless. His breath echoed in his ears. He raised his hand, hesitated, then finally knocked gently on the frame. For a moment there was nothing. Then a small gasp from inside, the sound of feet shuffling, and the cloth shifted slightly. A pair of glowing alien eyes peered out, wide and fearful. The youngest widow, holding her child tight against her chest, stared at him with suspicion and dread. Daniel said nothing yet. His voice caught in his throat, but his presence alone had broken the silence of their despair. The widows were no longer unseen, no longer forgotten. Someone had followed them, someone had noticed, and though they did not know it yet, their lives had already begun to change. The hut was silent, except for the weak sound of children breathing. Inside, the walls leaned as if they would fall with the next strong wind. Torn cloth hung in place of doors, the roof patched with broken boards and scraps. There was no table, no chairs, only a floor of cold stone and a single cracked bowl in the corner. The widows had tried to keep it a home, but the emptiness told the truth. It was not a home, only a shelter where hope slowly died. The eldest widow, her silver skin dull under the dim light, pushed her children toward the corner. She whispered to them softly, trying to calm their hunger, but her voice trembled. The second widow, tall with glowing blue markings on her cheeks, knelt beside a child who coughed again and again. Her hands rubbed the child's back, though she had no medicine to offer, no water even. The youngest widow, still clutching her baby, sat nearest the doorway, her eyes locked on the human shadow outside, her arms tight around her child as if shielding against danger. Daniel stood in the doorway, his large frame blocking the flickering lamplight. He said nothing for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dark interior. What he saw broke something inside him. Children with hollow cheeks, lips cracked from thirst, tiny hands holding on to mothers who had nothing left to give. He had seen hunger before, but never like this. Never this raw. Never this close to the edge. The eldest widow finally spoke, her voice low and sharp. "Why are you here, human?" Her tone carried both suspicion and fear. She expected mockery, maybe violence, for no stranger ever came with kindness. Daniel took a breath. His hands raised slightly in peace. I saw you in the market," he said slowly, his words heavy. "I could not walk away." The widows exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing. They had been mocked before, tricked before, their kind labeled as cursed. Why should this man be different? The youngest widow shook her head. "If you came to laugh, then laugh and leave. We have no strength for games." Her child whimpered against her shoulder, and she rocked him gently, her eyes burning with tired defiance. Daniel stepped forward, his boots scraping against the stone. The widow stiffened, but he did not move with the arrogance of others. He lowered himself down, sitting on the cold floor beside the cracked bowl, at their level. The children stared at him, their large alien eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Daniel reached into the worn bag slung over his shoulder, his fingers searching until he pulled out a small piece of flat bread, the only food he had saved from his own supper. He placed it on the floor gently, sliding it toward the nearest child. The child looked to his mother first. The eldest widow nodded weakly, and the child grabbed the bread with trembling hands, breaking it into smaller pieces to share with siblings. They chewed slowly, as if afraid the food might vanish from their mouths. Daniel's chest ached at the sight. He had eaten bread like that once too, breaking one piece among 3 brothers. Listening to his mother's voice tell them to chew slowly so the stomach would believe it was more, the second widow's voice broke the silence. "Why?" she whispered, staring at him, her blue markings dim but her eyes sharp. "Why would you give us your food? Why would a human care?" Daniel hesitated, then spoke softly. "Because I remember what hunger feels like, and because no one should face it alone." The youngest widow shook her head, suspicion still in her gaze. "We are cursed, do you not know? No one will hire us. No one will even touch what we touch." Daniel looked around the broken hut, at the empty bowls, at the shivering children, then back at the women. "Then let me be the fool who does not care about curses," he said firmly. For a long time, silence filled the hut again, broken only by the faint crackle of the lamp and the sound of children licking crumbs from their fingers. The eldest widow studied him, her face lined with years of sorrow. She searched his eyes for lies, but found only tired honesty. "Still," she said, "we need work, not pity. Do you have work to give?" Daniel's hand curled into a fist on his knee. He had nothing grand, no riches, no land. But he had machines at the dock that needed repair, gears that needed cleaning, heavy crates that needed lifting. "I cannot promise wealth," he admitted, "but I can promise a chance. Work, food, a way forward." The widows stared at him as if he had spoken something impossible, their breaths caught, their eyes widening. The youngest widow clutched her child closer, her voice almost breaking. "Why us? Why not hire anyone else?" Daniel's answer was simple, and it carried the weight of his own past. "Because I know what it means to be turned away from every door." The children pressed closer to their mothers, whispering in their alien tongue, their eyes fixed on the human who had stepped into their hut. The widows were caught between fear and hope, between disbelief and the faint flicker of a new dawn. Outside, the night wind howled, carrying with it the whispers of a city that had already judged them. Inside, a fragile silence held, 3 widows and 1 human breathing the same heavy air, standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything. Daniel lowered his gaze, his voice steady but quiet. "If you want me to leave, I will leave, but if you want a chance, come to the docks at sunrise. I will be there." He rose slowly, his shadow long against the wall. The widows watched him, their hearts racing, their trust not yet given, but their despair cracking under the weight of his words. As he stepped out into the night, the youngest widow whispered to the others, her voice trembling, "What if he is the answer we prayed for?" The eldest shook her head, but her eyes, for the first time in years, carried a glimmer of something more than sorrow. The sun rose weak and pale, spilling light across the broken streets. The market was waking, merchants opening their stalls, voices already rising with the noise of trade. But at the far edge of the city, the widows did not join the crowd. Instead, they stood together outside their hut, their children clinging. To them, the night had passed with little sleep, filled with whispers and questions, each widow wondering if the human's words were truth or trick. The youngest widow wanted to believe. Her heart longed for hope, but her fear whispered louder. The eldest carried doubts carved by years of rejection, and the second stood between them, her mind torn by both suspicion and need. The children were hungry again, their eyes wide, their bellies empty. The eldest widow pressed her lips into a thin line and finally said, "We must see if his words were real, even if it is a trap. What choice do we have?" With slow steps, they began walking. The road to the docks long and filled with curious stares. People whispered as they passed. Some muttered curses, others laughed. A group of merchants shouted after them, "Off to curse another fool, are you?" But the widows kept walking, their heads lowered, their hands clutching their children's. The memory of Daniel's steady eyes gave them the strength to move forward. At the docks, the air was heavy with the smell of oil and salt. Ships creaked as cargo was moved. Machines roared and groaned, workers shouted to each other over the noise. Daniel was already there, his hands black with grease, his shirt damp with sweat. He lifted a heavy gear into place, then turned when he felt eyes on him. The widows stood at the edge of the dock, uncertain, their children peeking from behind their legs. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Daniel met their gaze, and then with a small nod he motioned them closer. The workers nearby stopped to watch, their faces twisted with curiosity and disdain. Whispers spread quickly. "The cursed widow's here. Has the human lost his mind? He'll regret this." Daniel ignored them. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked forward, stopping, a few steps from the widows. "You came?" he said, his voice carrying a quiet relief. The eldest widow lifted her chin. "We came because we have no choice," she answered, her tone firm, though her eyes betrayed her doubt. Daniel nodded, accepting her honesty. "Then listen, I will not treat you as beggars. You will work, you will earn, you will be paid in food and coin." The second widow frowned, her blue markings flickering faintly. Why risk yourself? Do you not see how they look at you already? Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes glancing briefly at the gathering crowd, then back at her. Let them look, I do not care what they see. I care that children should not starve when there is work to be done. The youngest widow clutched her child tighter. What work do you mean? She asked cautiously. Daniel motioned to the machines around them. The gears must be cleaned, the crates must be moved. Repairs are endless here. I have more work than I can handle, and no hands willing to do it for what I can pay. He paused, his voice firm. If you agree, you will start today. No tricks, no lies. The widows exchanged glances, their hearts beating fast. It was the first real offer they had heard in years, but it sounded too simple, too unreal. The eldest whispered to her sisters, "What if he betrays us like the others?" The second's eyes narrowed. "And what if he does not?" The youngest looked at her child's thin face, his tiny fingers clutching at her robe, and she whispered, "Then maybe the stars finally heard us." They turned back to Daniel, the eldest speaking for all. "We will work, but know this, if you break your word, we have nothing left to lose." Daniel met her eyes without flinching. "Then I will not break it," he said, his voice steady as stone. He motioned them to follow, leading them to the machines. The work was hard, the gears heavy, the tools rough. But the widows did not complain. They rolled up their sleeves and began. The eldest scrubbed the rust from old pipes, her hands raw but steady. The second lifted crates with surprising strength, her back straight despite the weight. The youngest wiped and sorted tools, balancing, her baby on her hip. Daniel worked beside them, showing them each step, not standing above them but kneeling in the grime with them. Around them, the other workers whispered louder, some laughed, others spat on the ground. "He'll pay for this," one muttered. "The widows will bring ruin," Daniel heard, but he did not stop. Instead, he said clearly enough for all to hear, "A curse cannot clean gears, a curse cannot move crates. Look with your eyes, see the truth." The widows froze at his words. Unused to anyone speaking for them, unused to being defended, their eyes flickered with something unfamiliar. Dignity. For the first time, the children laughed nearby, their voices light as they played with empty wooden crates, their small bellies soon to be filled with bread from Daniel's bag. The youngest widow wiped sweat from her brow, her heart pounding, with something she had almost forgotten: hope. As the sun reached its peak, Daniel paused and looked at them. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But from now on, you will not walk with empty hands." The widows stood silent, their breaths heavy, their arms aching, but inside, something new burned, the first fragile spark of a life no longer chained to rejection. And though the city still whispered curses, though the crowd still judged, the widows knew one thing with certainty: this human was different. The morning stretched into afternoon, the docks alive with constant noise. Ships groaned as cargo shifted. Steam hissed from vents, and the smell of oil and salt mixed thick in the air. For most workers it was another ordinary day, but for the three widows it was different. It was their first day of real work after years of rejection, their first chance to prove they were not the cursed outcasts everyone claimed. Daniel worked alongside them, his hands black with grease, his back bent to the same weight. He gave instructions but never barked orders. Instead, he showed them how to turn the gears, how to clean the pipes, how to balance the heavy crates, so their spines would not break under strain. The eldest widow, silver-skinned and sharp-eyed, impressed him with her patience. She cleaned gears with care, never rushing, her steady hands saving parts that others would have thrown away. The second widow, tall with glowing blue markings, lifted crates with surprising strength, her arms, trembling at first but steadying with each load, the rhythm of work giving her a kind of dignity she thought she had lost. The youngest widow balancing her child on one hip, sorted tools and scrubbed chains, her baby quiet as if sensing the importance of this moment. Her eyes filled with determination, even as sweat rolled down her temples. Around them, the other dock. Workers whispered, their voices dripping with scorn. "Look at the cursed widows." One sneered, touching our machines, soon they'll break. Human fool, another spat. He'll lose his job for this. Some laughed openly, pointing. Others simply shook their heads, already convinced disaster would follow. But Daniel ignored them, and slowly, so did the widows. The rhythm of work drowned out the cruelty of words. The sound of hammers, chains, and turning gears became stronger than whispers. The children sat nearby, nibbling on scraps of bread Daniel had given them, their eyes wide with wonder as they watched their mother's work. For the first time in years, they saw strength in their mothers' backs, saw them not as beggars but as workers. Their laughter rang out as they played with empty wooden crates, stacking them into towers and pretending they were palaces. The widows glanced at them often, smiles flickering through exhaustion. Those tiny laughs gave them more energy than food ever could. As the sun climbed higher, sweat soaked their robes, their arms burned, yet none of them complained. They had faced hunger, humiliation, and despair. Heavy crates were nothing compared to that. Daniel noticed their effort. He saw the pride in the eldest widow's eyes as she handed him a gear polished until it gleamed. He saw the tall widow's determination as she carried loads that would shame stronger men. He saw the youngest's hands, blistered yet steady, never dropping a single tool. He felt respect for them grow, not pity, not charity, but respect. By midday, the work slowed briefly. Daniel shared water from a tin canteen, passing it without hesitation, drinking last himself. The widows stared for a moment before taking small sips, their throats burning but grateful. The eldest widow finally broke the silence. "No one has worked beside us in years," she said softly. "Why do you?" Daniel wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes steady. "Because work is not shame, and neither are you." Her lips parted, but no words came. She had been called cursed, useless, broken, but never worker, never worthy. The second widow's blue markings glowed faintly as she whispered, "They will not forgive you for this." Daniel shrugged, his voice calm. "Let them hate, their hatred does not feed children. Work does." The youngest widow looked at her child sleeping against her shoulder, tears stinging her eyes. "If only one heart like yours had existed sooner," she whispered, "we would not have lost so much." Daniel's gaze softened, but he did not answer. He only returned to the machine, tightening bolts with steady hands, letting his silence speak for him. By late afternoon, the docks had grown louder. A crowd gathered at a distance, workers who had nothing better to do than watch, their laughter rising every time the widow stumbled, their voices sharp with cruel delight. Yet the widows stood taller, their hands black with grease, their arms sore, but their heads higher than they had been in years. Each insult only hardened their resolve. The children clapped when their mothers finished each task, cheering as if victories were being won. And in truth, they were victories. Quiet ones. Unseen by most, but victories all the same. As the sun began to fall, Daniel called the work to an end. He handed the widows small sacks of bread and coins, payment for their labor. Their eyes widened, disbelief painted on their faces. The eldest widow held the bag in trembling hands, whispering, "You meant it. You truly meant it." Daniel nodded once. "A day's work for a day's pay, that is all. Nothing more, nothing less." The second widow looked around at the hostile crowd, then back at him, her voice firm. "You have made enemies today." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then let them come. I have seen worse enemies than gossip." The youngest widow pressed the bread to her child's lips, tears falling freely now. "You saved us," she whispered, though Daniel only shook his head. "No, you saved yourselves. I only gave you a chance." As night approached, the widows walked back through the streets, children full for the first time in weeks, sacks of bread and coin in their hands. Whispers followed them still, but for once they did not bow their heads. Daniel watched them go, a quiet pride in his chest, but also a weight, for he knew the whispers would soon turn into something sharper, and the real trial was yet to come. The widows thought their first day of work had given them safety, food in their hands, coin in their pockets, and dignity in their hearts. But safety never lasts long where hatred runs deep. By the second morning, whispers had already grown into rumors and rumors into lies. The merchants who had once rejected the widows now gathered in the marketplace, their voices sharp, their words heavy with poison. "They steal food from children," one shouted. "They curse the machines. The dock will collapse," another swore. And always their fingers pointed toward the human. "He shelters them, he betrays his own kind for the cursed widows." The crowd fed on itself, anger spreading faster than fire. By midday, guards were called to the docks, armored figures with long staffs of iron and authority, their boots striking heavy against the ground. Their arrival turned every whisper into silence. Daniel saw them first, their armor shining in the harsh light, and his heart tightened. He had known this would come. He had heard the mutters, the warnings, but still he worked, wiping grease from his hands as the widows froze beside the machines. The eldest widow whispered to the others, "It begins," her voice low and heavy, her silver skin pale. The youngest clutched her baby so tightly the child whimpered, her fear spilling out of her trembling hands. The second widow's blue markings flickered like fading fire, her jaw clenched, her body braced as if ready to be dragged away. The guards stopped at the edge of the dock, their leader stepping forward, his voice loud and sharp. "Who gave these cursed women permission to work?" he demanded. Daniel straightened, his broad shoulders squared, grease still staining his shirt. "I did," he answered, his voice calm but unshaken. The leader sneered. "You break the order of this city. You defy the merchants, you spit on the council's judgment. Do you deny it?" Daniel shook his head. "I deny nothing. I gave them work and they earned it." The crowd behind the guards hissed like snakes, voices rising. "Punish them, drive them out, tear down their hut." The guards tightened their grips on their staffs, ready to strike. The widows' children cried, their small voices cutting through the chaos. The eldest widow stepped forward, placing herself between the guards and her children, her voice sharp though her body trembled. "We took nothing. We worked for every crumb. We begged no more." But the guards only laughed, their leader lifting his staff. "Your words mean nothing. Cursed blood cannot be washed clean." The youngest widow sobbed, falling to her knees. "Please, not the children," she begged, her baby crying against her chest. The second widow pulled her sisters closer, her eyes burning. "It is useless. They will not listen. They want us gone." The eldest lowered her head, whispering to her children, "Be strong, my little ones." The staff rose higher, ready to strike. The crowd roared for punishment. The guards stepped forward. But then Daniel moved. He stepped between the widows and the guards, his shadow falling long across the dock, his voice like iron. "If you want them, you'll have to take me too." The crowd gasped. The guards hesitated. Never before had a human stood in front of outcasts. Never before had anyone dared to shield them. The leader snarled, "You are a fool, human. Do you know what you risk?" Daniel's voice did not waver. "I know hunger, I know rejection, and I know injustice when I see it. These women are guilty of nothing but surviving, and I will not let you touch them." The guards circled, their staffs raised. The widows clutched their children, their hearts pounding. This moment stretched like eternity. The eldest widow whispered, "Why does he do this?" The youngest's tears streamed. "He will be destroyed for us." The second's markings glowed brighter. Faint hope, fighting fear. Maybe. The stars sent him. The dock workers who had once mocked now watched in silence, some eyes wide with shock, others narrowing with anger, none daring to move. The leader of the guards barked, "Arrest him! Arrest them all!" But as his men stepped forward, a grinding sound shook the dock. A machine nearby gave a sudden roar, the gears spinning, the repaired system humming to life. The workers gasped, pointing. "The machines, they work!" one shouted. Daniel turned his head slightly, motioning toward the widows. "They fix them," he declared, his voice carrying across the dock. "With their hands, with their labor, not curses but skill." The guards paused, their staffs lowering slightly. The crowd muttered, torn between anger and the undeniable truth before their eyes. The eldest widow held her breath, her heart pounding. The second gripped her sister's arm, the youngest rocked her crying child, none of them daring to believe. The guard's leader hesitated. His pride stung, but even he could not deny what everyone saw. The machines ran smoother than they had in months. The dock stronger because of the widows, not weaker. Daniel faced the crowd, his voice steady. You say they are cursed, then look at what their hands have built. Look at what they have given back to this city. Silence spread, heavy and thick. Even the cruelest whispers struggled to rise. The guards finally stepped back, their leader spitting on the ground. This is not over, human, he growled. But he motioned his men to leave. The crowd broke apart slowly, angry voices fading, leaving behind only the widows, the children, and Daniel, standing in the quiet aftermath. The eldest widow dropped to her knees, her breath shaking, her children pressing against her sides. The second widow's blue markings dimmed again, her strength spent, her eyes wet. The youngest held her child tight, sobbing into his hair, whispering thanks through her tears. Daniel looked at them, his chest heavy, his voice low but firm. No one will touch you while I stand. For the first time, the widows believed him. The docks were quiet after the guards left, but the silence was heavy. The widows sat close together, their children pressed against them, their bodies shaking. From fear that still clung to their bones, Daniel stood nearby. His hands clenched, his shirt dark with sweat and grease, his jaw set firm, though his heart still raced. He had faced down guards before, but never for strangers, never for those the whole city called cursed. Yet when he looked at the widows, when he saw the way their children stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes, he knew he would do it again. That night the widows returned to their hut with food and coin. Their children ate until their bellies were full. Laughter returned to the broken walls, fragile but real. The eldest widow whispered as she tucked her children into the corner. Maybe the curse is not real. Maybe it was only their hatred. The second widow, her blue markings glowing faintly, answered, Maybe. Hope is stronger than curses. The youngest pressed her baby against her chest, tears running down her cheeks. Maybe this human is the answer we prayed for. But outside their hut, trouble still brewed. Merchants angry at their loss of control gathered, their lies spreading again. The human protects them, but he cannot protect himself, they muttered. We must make an example of him. Yet even as anger spread, another voice began to rise among the poor workers, those who had seen the widows labor with their own eyes, those who had watched the machines come back to life. They worked harder than any of us, one said. They fixed what none of us could, another admitted, and slowly the city's whispers began to split, some filled with hatred, others with doubt. The next morning the widows returned to the docks, their heads bowed in fear, but Daniel greeted them with a steady nod, his voice calm. The work is waiting. They hesitated, expecting more guards, more curses, but instead something different happened. A small group of dock workers stepped forward, not with jeers but with questions. Show us how you cleaned those gears, one asked. Another scratched his head. The pipes run smoother than before. How did you do it? The widows exchanged stunned glances, their hands shaking. The eldest finally spoke, her voice soft. We only worked with care. We did what no one else wished to do. The workers listened, and though suspicion still lingered, respect flickered too. As the days passed, more machines were repaired, more crates moved, more tools, polished until they shone. The docks ran smoother than anyone could remember. Ships left on time. Merchants grudgingly admitted business had improved. And though they hated the widows, they could not deny the truth. Their work had value. Every time they were paid, the widows carried bread and coins back to their hut. Their children grew stronger, their cheeks less hollow, their laughter louder. Still, the final test came weeks later. When the city council called a hearing, merchants demanded punishment. The cursed widows defy tradition, the human defies law, remove them all, they cried. But Daniel walked into the chamber with the widows behind him, his boots loud on the polished stone, his voice carrying across the hall. If you condemn them, then condemn me too, for their hands built what your city now thrives on, and I will not let you erase the truth. The council murmured, uneasy. Merchants shouted louder, but then dock workers stepped forward one after another. They fixed the gears, one said. They saved my shift, another added. They kept food on our tables when the machines broke. The voices of ordinary men and women filled the chamber, louder than the merchants' hate. The council could not ignore it. There are judgment heavy in the air. Finally, the elder stood and declared, These widows are not cursed. Their work proves their worth. Let them be free to labor as they choose. Gasps echoed through the hall. The widows fell to their knees, tears streaming down their faces, their children clutching at them with joy. For the first time in years, they were no longer outcasts, no longer shadows on the street, but workers, mothers, and people with dignity restored. Outside the chamber, the merchants spat and cursed, but the crowd cheered, voices rising. Work is not shame. The widows earned it. The humans stood for them. The widows stood tall, their children laughing in the sunlight, and Daniel walked beside them, his shoulders heavy but proud. That evening, back at the hut, the eldest widow looked at Daniel, her silver eyes wet with gratitude. You gave us more than food, more than coin. You gave us our lives back. The second's markings glowed bright with strength. We will never forget what you risked. The youngest, holding her baby close, whispered through her tears. We were nothing, and you saw us as something. May the stars bless you? Daniel shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. I did not save you. You saved yourselves. I only opened a door. You walked through it with your own strength. The widows smiled, their children full and safe, their hut no longer silent with despair but alive with hope. And as the night fell, stars shining above the city, the story of the cursed widows began to change. They were no longer cursed, no longer rejected, but living proof that even in the darkest places, one act of kindness could save more than lives. It could save dignity, hope, and the future. For the galaxy had turned its face away, but one human had not, and that choice had saved them all.